Good morning and welcome to the evidence session given for the APPG in social inclusion. I'm joined this morning by Arnab Dutt from the Federation of Small Businesses and Joe Giles from Cadent, who are the UK's largest gas distribution network. The APPG for social inclusion has produced a report in the middle of the COVID pandemic dealing with a whole host of issues relevant to our area of research. And following that report, we have then scheduled a number of other reports, which this is an evidence-giving session for. And we're looking specifically today to try and understand how social inclusion can be brought about by the engagement of business in the community and where we're at from COVID perspective following the changes in our society as a result of that. So if I can just hand over first of all to Arnab, if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your organisation, a little bit of an overview in respect of how your members have responded to the pandemic. That would be great, and then I'll hand over to Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So the FSB is the largest SME business organisation in the UK. We have 165,000 members, and we have a network of nearly 400,000 other businesses that we work with and who are parts of other business associations. We seek to represent all self-employed micro businesses and SMEs in the country, lobbying on policy, and of course we've been very busy over COVID. I am not only a business owner, but as with all FSB policy chairs, I lead on social value. I sit on the Cabinet Office Working Group on the SME panel on social value. I also sit on the National Social Value Task Force, and I've been working over the last few years in how to integrate social value into public sector procurement. So undoubtedly, many small businesses have been forced to think about the nature of their business during this crisis, and many have adapted where possible to the changing environment. And there are many examples of SMEs partnering with social enterprise and charities to help with distribution, the manufacture of hand gels and PPE. Local small retailers have been carrying out deliveries to the vulnerable, the infirm, and the housebound elderly. So the local corner shops and the BME community have been very important in this, taking telephone orders where customers couldn't, because they couldn't use digital platforms and they couldn't leave their homes. Independent pharmacists, nearly half from the BME communities, continue to play an important role in ensuring everyone receives medication and health advice. They continue making visits and delivering essentials. In terms of mental well-being and staff retention, this has always been something small businesses do very well. They have on the front line. We as a society did not appreciate that before. So I want to give you a few figures from the FSB report from 2019 titled Small Business Big Heart, which had over 8,000 respondents across the UK. 89% of SMEs offer their workforce part-time or flexible working. 80% of FSB members have contributed to their local community, including support for voluntary groups and charities. 78% have at least one worker over 50. 95% have taken at least one worker from a labour market disadvantaged group. 41% offer work experience through community outreach, and 38% donate time and expertise to their local communities. SMEs do more because they are at the heart of their communities. So if deployed properly, the Social Value Act on public procurement will encourage more SMEs to work with social enterprise and charities to provide innovative solutions to the enormous social challenges we now face. The OBR's figures of 13% unemployment and approximately 500,000 youth unemployed is chastening. And that also means many small businesses will have trouble surviving. At a time where the need for charities and their support in communities is growing, the Charity Finance Group say that charities will lose 12.4 billion in income. This means investment from government is needed, not only in supporting small businesses, but also in the social infrastructure of communities so that SMEs and charities can work together to face the challenges around social exclusion. Best practice is about innovation and businesses being able to identify local economic opportunity and the social needs in their area. There's, for example, a small cleaning company in Nottingham that employs ex-drug addicts and ex-street sleepers. The social impact on those people in terms of stability, mental well-being, health, economic productivity is enormous. And now multiply that sort of thinking, and small businesses can have an even bigger role to play in rebuilding our social fabric. I refer you to the work of the British Library using local libraries and the digital platforms they provide to bring people together, teaching them new skills that might help them start a business or gain employment in partnership with community groups and local SMEs. So government has a role to play as an enabler, but the solutions, as stated in your report, and the leadership for social challenges must be led by local communities who can build the appropriate architecture that suits their particular needs. So my message is we need to do more than level up. We need to transform. Thank you, Peter.
I think you're on mute, Peter.
Thank you, Anna. That was fantastic. And some of those statistics that you've given are truly overwhelming. And I'd like to dig down into some of those once we've heard from Joe. So Joe, over to you, please.
Yeah, that's a tough act to follow. Thanks for that. Yes, similar, an introduction to myself and to Cadent, who I work for. So my name is Jo Giles. I'm the Customer Safeguarding Manager at Cadent, but I also do a lot of work more nationally across the utility industry as well. Tell you a little bit about Cadent. So we are what's known as a gas distribution network, and we are the largest, shortened to GDN, in the UK, owning and operating 4 of the 8 networks across the UK. So we might be a relatively new company in name to some people, but we do have a 200-year legacy. The networks themselves are very much about pipe work under the ground and safely transporting gas to homes, schools and businesses in Cadent's network across the northwest of England, West Midlands, East Anglia and East Midlands, and also North London. As a company, we're moving towards net zero by leading on projects relating to green gas and hydrogen in our networks for heat, cooking and transport. We have approximately 4,000 direct labour colleagues and many others that we work with, and we're a Category 2 responder under the Civil Contingencies Act. All of this means very similar, I suppose, to the details that we just heard from Arnav, that our colleagues are actually on the ground and in people's homes, seeing life happen. We have both emergency and what we call replacement work to ensure that the safety of and transportation of gas to people's properties. And that means that our colleagues need to be equipped and confident to deal with what they find when that front door opens. The thing in today's society, of course, just again like Arnav's colleagues that he represents, when we do go into people's homes, we actually come across those who are isolated and living in particular vulnerable situations. And we need to make certain that our actions are, yes, consistent, respectful, and actually, you know, drive the right outcomes for customers. So as much as we may be a gas distribution network, our colleagues can be the people that our customers see. That one face may be in goodness knows how long. Even with their interactions with their GP, that might be over the phone or in the surgery, to actually go into somebody's home and see the situation is very different. So therefore we work really hard to ensure that we have the foundations in place to allow us to prepare before we knock on that front door, but also react when we are going into people's homes, to actually take the relevant actions for us, make certain that that customer is feeling comfortable with our being in their home, but likewise also looking to see where we can make the most of that interaction. It's about us connecting those customers with the communities that they live within, and being aware that actually there are services that those customers might not know they are in existence. We, through the Priority Services Register, which is something that I've led on across the energy industry, put in place a consistent approach across the categories and how that data is kept and shared following GDPR to provide that relevant service and very importantly, providing equal access. We've also used the platform of awareness more around vulnerability and the compounding factors of vulnerability, to help drive innovation, new services, and also those safeguarding services that mean that our colleagues are equipped on the doorstep. Throughout the COVID-19 first lockdown, we found that there were some really fantastic activities going on. We were able to empower our colleagues to do all the right things and help support more regionalised voluntary activities, not only just empowering them, but to also give back to their neighbourhoods. I think the beauty is, same with Arnab as well, our people not only work for us, they live in these communities. So this is about actually not work, this is about every day. It's our families, our friends, our neighbours, and we want to make certain that we're inclusive. We want to make certain that we're actually, doing something means it's not just getting us out of bed in the morning, but we're connecting people all the way along. So Arnab, I'm really interested to have a further conversation with you about maybe how we can work together. And again, Arnab, absolutely right. There are lots of ways that we can be more connected and support. To do that would be fabulous. We do lots of work with local authorities, resilience groups. The priority services register data is really rich, it's really up to date, but it's very different to data that maybe other government departments have got. There were some limitations that we found throughout the lockdown. So, for example, the shielding data, if we'd have had some form of sight of that, it would have been really helpful, because we are still an emergency service. We're still going into people's homes, and as much as we can make certain we're doing all of the visuals to allow people to feel less anxious that they have somebody coming into their home, that we wash our hands so people can see, we make certain we have the PPE, we put shoe coverings on, all of those things to build that confidence in us as a reputable company, but also safeguarding and doing the right thing. Actually making certain that if we'd had some form of flag to know that that house was shielding at the point of that call coming in, etc., there could have been additional proactive steps that we could maybe have taken to help support those households. We did, however, on the doorstep mean that as much as we didn't have that information, we equipped our colleagues to do what they needed to on the doorstep, right from if they came across a household that was shielding and they were struggling through their own network to gain groceries, to go and buy some essentials at a local supermarket and claim it back on expenses through the business. This was about making certain that it's a holistic view to safeguard. We work very much by the motto of keeping people safe, warm and independent in their homes. And that means that it's the driver for all of these factors to ensure that our colleagues, no matter where they work, are able to support in a relevant way. Lots more to tell you, but aware of meant to be a very quick introduction. So I will now hand back to you, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo, and I look forward to delving in more detail into the experiences that you're able to bring to our evidence session this morning. So thank you to both of you for your introductions. If it's okay with you, I propose to ask Arnab some questions first. As I said, Jo, if you want to indicate to me just by raising your hand that you want to comment on something Arnab said, and then if I do that in the other direction as well. So Arnab, as a former business owner myself and a former FSB member myself, it didn't come as any surprise to me that small independent businesses are at the heart of the community and they do a lot of good stuff. The statistics that you gave to us were really quite overwhelming, and I particularly would like to dive into your statistic of 95% of FSB members responding to a survey are employing people from disadvantaged communities, because I think that goes to the heart of what we're talking about in terms of getting different backgrounds, working together as part of a community. So can you tell me, what is the magic formula for getting people integrated into their communities through the work that they do for small businesses?
I wish I had the answer to that, because when we did the research, we were as pleasantly surprised as you were, but we wanted to measure that impact. Often the problem is that we talk about social value, and many of our small businesses, when we talk to them about it, look at us And then we ask them, what are you doing in your communities? What are you doing with the local library? Are you spaces? And before we know it, they're telling us of all the amazing things they're doing, who they employ, where they look for people. And it gave us an opportunity to actually measure the impact. So it turns out our small businesses are hugely impactful in terms of adding social value to our economy, but they don't even realize they're doing it because they just do it automatically. They're at the heart of their communities. And I think that they succeed because they're people get to trust them, and trust is a really important matter. It's very difficult to trust large corporations, and we know that because the large corporations spend billions trying to get us to trust them. Small community organisations and your high street shops, your local solicitor, your local butcher, your local baker, these are people you know, they're part of your lives, they stay with you. You have a rapport, and that trust, I think, is really important. It's an important part of community cohesion, and I think is probably the secret sauce which has meant that we've got such a fantastic level of engagement from those people that corporates wouldn't normally look at. So we've got your NEETs, you've got your elderly, you've got people with maybe mental health problems, people who may not be able to fulfill a site test or do the normal type of applications you would for those big corporate jobs. And our fantastic SMEs fill that gap and are able to then give these individuals an opportunity to shine, to show their talents, to be productive, to be part of the community, and to contribute. And I think that intimacy and that trust is the source or the magic sprinkle dust, which means that SMEs are so effective.
Thank you. Is it, in summary, is it that small SMEs don't have a corporate social responsibility policy because it just simply is what they do?
Yeah, you've hit it on the head, Peter. What we're trying to do under the Social Value Act and what we're doing at Cabinet Office and with commissioning is we want to get more SMEs on board onto public procurement contracts, but it has to be a system which allows them to shine. It can't be prescriptive, and we want them to do what they do best, and also give them the tools to actually articulate where they are on the maturity and see if they can do better. And I think that is the purpose and the direction of travel, to give SMEs an opportunity to scale up, to grow, to get onto public sector and strategic contracts. And I think the Social Value Act, if properly deployed, will do that. And then the impact that we've already demonstrated in our report from 2019 should be amplified.
So you're essentially helping your members tell the story, tell the marketing piece, if you like, about the things that they're actually doing intrinsically as part of their everyday jobs in their communities, and helping them package it into a story.
That's right. I mean, hopefully with the measures that we're putting in, they'll be able to tell that story better. And more importantly, we'll be able to measure the impact. And by measuring it, policymakers like yourself can innovate on that and calibrate policy to make sure it's as effective as possible. And that's really what we want for the future. And also to really open up that public procurement to SMEs so that they feel they're very much part of it, and that it's not just all these huge giant companies that we hear about, the G4Ss and the Sercos. The public procurement and the public sector supply chain is an opportunity for all of them, and to bring the great social value that they already are sort of very much part of in their local communities, and amplifying that, and if, as I said in my piece, if we can multiply that effect across the country, imagine the level of GVA. We've calculated that could bring as much as 65 to 80 billion pounds of extra value into the economy. Imagine.
Thank you. In terms of the statistics that you've given us from your members who've responded to the survey, how do you see policy helping drive that level of engagement from businesses that are perhaps not already doing some of the things that you've talked about. How do we encourage those businesses who have perhaps not done some of these things, who are not FSB members, who haven't responded to your survey? How do we get them to become a better part of our communities, to help that integration?
I think the most important thing is how we communicate, and I think the steps we're taking at the moment across government, especially Cabinet Office, DCMS, in the process of engagement and really publicising best practices in behaviour, and also having that conversation and displaying, you know, the example I gave you about radiant cleaners in Nottingham. You know, there are hundreds of fantastic examples of best practice, and they're the ones that we want to get out to SMEs. And by saying, you know, this is what you can do, this is your potential, and it's hugely beneficial to you to be doing this, especially if it helps you onboard onto supply chain contracts on the public sector, whether local government or central government, or being in partnership with those strategic suppliers, especially in the next 3 years. Because one great thing about public sector procurement for SMEs, it does give a level of security. And with the prompt payment code and all the great stuff that's happening now, it does mean that companies get paid on time. And getting paid and cash flow, as you know, as a former small business owner, is really, really important. So they're all the carrots that we can put out there for small businesses in order for them to really sort of take this challenge up and work with each other and work with their communities and work in public procurement. So there's a lot of potential there.
Would you be able to just comment for a moment about the levels of government support in terms of bounce back loans, furlough, business grants, Eat Out to Help Out, VAT reductions, etc. How that package of measures has helped your members, where the packages of support maybe haven't hit everybody, where you still found some gaps in your members, and how that package of support has also helped the civic society role of small businesses.
Okay, so that's a really good question. Obviously, in this emergency, the measures that were rolled out, and many that we lobbied for and put together at the FSB, were inevitably going to be one size fits all. And though they helped many small businesses, I think, Peter, you alluded to the fact that quite a few slipped through the gaps as well. And some of the information we got back were many of our BME SMEs really fell through the gaps because the measures were probably not communicated as well, especially for those communities where English is a second language. And we found out that they were less able to navigate applications for CBILS and for bounce back loans. We also found that amongst those sort of communities, especially in some of the most deprived parts of the country, there was less uptake. They maybe didn't have the digital skills necessary. So there are all these things that are coming to the fore. And I think, you know, digital skills is one of the areas I think your APPG has noted very much so that we need to address. So going forward over the next few years, that is where the gaps were, and they are the gaps that we need to fill going forward. And that really did affect quite a substantive amount of SMEs.
Just a supplementary to that point before you finish the answer to the wider question I asked. Do you believe that the announcements this week about people being able to access further education throughout their life is going to be of help there? Or do you, again, believe that it perhaps is not necessarily going to reach the parts that it needs to reach in terms of those English as a second language communities, those people without the digital skills? And what, if anything, can we do and inform this discussion about making sure that as part of, and I'm going very much off piste here because I know this isn't really part of the subject matter here, but in terms of that piece of government policy in terms of access to education, making sure that that helps improve that digital connectivity, that social inclusion, etc.
So, yeah, that's a really good question. And this is something that I think we were looking, government were looking at long before the pandemic, because we understood we had a systemic weakness, you know, and we needed to ensure that lifelong learning was very much part of an answer to almost a system change that we need. So it's really important. I'm really glad that it's going to come into the fore. It's something we've needed for a very long time in order to sort of transform and make this necessary system change for a more resilient, future-proofed economy. Is it the answer for the next 12 months? No. But it is an important part of fixing things and making them better for the future. So I'm very glad that that's happened. I think more importantly, things like the Kickstarter scheme, apprenticeships, immediate training, making sure that we are making provision for young people, especially given the figures that I gave you of what we're possibly looking at over the next couple of years with you know, the economic outlook. So you know, so if that answers your supplementary question, I hope that was okay.
Well, this morning alone, I've had a meeting with one of the heads of a local further education college here in Darlington, and I've got a very good relationship. I speak to her regularly, and she's very excited about this week's announcements. And I said, look, what can we do to make sure that this isn't the same people that would ordinarily come to further education anyway? What can we do to get out there in the community, go to the parts of town where we've got a mixed community, a deprived community, a disadvantaged community, to make sure that we get some proper take up in those parts of town, those hard to reach, those difficult to reach. And so we're going to come up with a plan to actually go out and have some, you know, pop-ups in community centres, and to make sure that the message gets through to those parts of the community where we know that we can really make a difference.
One of the things that you might try, Peter, is we were looking at this with VCSEs and SMEs, and actually almost pairing and finding out who the community groups and charities are in those disadvantaged areas, and get them to be your intermediaries, because they know where the people are, who have the extreme challenges, and they will be able to actually gather that constituency for you and save you most of the work, and you'll be able to really re-engage with them directly. So engage with them first. They'll find the people for you who need that education and that help. And
at that point, I'll hand over to Jo, who's put her hand up. So Jo, you want to come in there?
Yeah, if I could,
yes,
so quickly agree with everything that's been said. Just kind of wanted to, you know, sort of offer, I suppose, you know, there's a lot of research that goes on, and I'm sure that everybody's got lots of different parts of research that they could share. But more recently, we've done some work with a variety of different parties, such as London Sustainability Exchange, to understand some more consistent approaches from a utility perspective, but it always translates into those harder to reach audiences, the compounding factors of vulnerability, whether it happens to be due to, you know, sort of people's culture, faith, or actually geographically, you know, due to rural versus urban differences as well. So we have got lots of information that we'd be very happy to share if it means it kind of cuts down on timescales. It maybe gives just a general view, because this is still about people in their homes. So whether it's SMEs or larger companies, it's beneficial to understand those different comms approaches and those different routes into groups. Likewise, I'm sure that everybody also has them as well. We do have lots of connections with lots of the national different varied groups to mean that we can get into those particular groups relatively easily ourselves, and also introduce others. So more of an offer of assistance from what Arneb's saying, that, you know, say if it helps reduce timescales and means that also save some money as well, getting research done that we've just recently had that could be translated, then very much open offer to share anything we've got, because this is about protecting and supporting those communities and our people.
Jo, please do send that through. All the information that we can gather in terms of research is going to be of benefit to not only this report, but other policymakers as well. So please do forward that through. Just staying with you, Jo, You raised a very important point, and it's a point that's come up in a number of evidence gathering sessions that I've been involved with through the Women and Equalities Committee, in terms of the priority services register that many utility companies have. I know there was issues between how the shielding list was compiled by NHS England, the interaction with the CCGs and the GP practices, how that data was then shared with the supermarkets, and the fall through of people who needed slots but weren't getting them.
Yes.
And I think that the lesson that I certainly took from that, and a lesson that I learned many times in business, is that whenever you're manipulating and moving and transforming and looking at any sets of data that have come from somewhere else that you have never had any control over, you have got to proceed with baby steps to make sure that nobody slips out of that net. And I think some people did slip out of the net, and I think that there are some lessons to be learned. Have you got any lessons from that experience that you can share with us that we can add into our report to make sure that in the future, in similar situations in the future, we can avoid those problems?
Yeah, well, it goes to support what's already been said, that, you know, as much as we are sort of on the larger side of a company, you know, we still work regionally. So actually working with those community groups, working sort of more collectively, so, you know, every interaction can count, but maybe using the frameworks that exist through some of the resilience forums to help support under GDPR, the sharing of that potentially personally sensitive data, maybe minimalising what it is, but at least being a flag that that household could benefit from prioritisation or just contact. And likewise through the priority services register, it's not just about the data. You know, the data is important, and it's important we keep it safe, but it's about the actions that data drives. So the work that I've led on across the industry around the priority services register is very much around a consistency in what somebody being registered on there, what that actually means for the customer, for the household. Because ultimately, if we're aware that there's a particular need and situation, we need to adapt. So when we're knocking on that front door, maybe whether it's one of us or one of our partners, that we adapt our tools available to our colleagues, whether it happens to be translation services on the doorstep. That includes things like the use of BSL through technology, you know, or actually whether it's just the knowledge of a knock and wait because somebody's going to take a little bit longer. I know from what Arnab will say with the sort of smaller businesses, there is absolutely, you know, sort of the link that people are neighbours, and so therefore they get to know that stuff intrinsically in everything that they're doing. But I think probably when we're looking to share and make certain that there is a consistency, no matter who it is that's helping that household, you know, there are lots of lessons from the priority services register which can just actually remove some of those, what I'd like to call, you know, they're social politenesses, which are actually based on assumptions that are wrong as well. You know, there are those.
Can you give us some examples there, Jo?
Yeah, so just to give you a little example, so when it comes to communication and people who are deaf, I'm kind of taking it on. I'm talking to the converted, but when you're talking about deaf, sometimes people who are deaf, they're deaf with a capital D, which means that they've been deaf from birth. And that fundamentally impacts our actions, because if you're deaf from birth, that is your language, and grammatically deaf is closer to Russian and Cantonese than it is English. So I think a social politeness historically would have been, oh, they're deaf, let's send them a letter, or somebody on the doorstep talking slowly and loudly. It doesn't translate. So actually just having a little bit of those eureka moments to know what the actual respectful actions are on the doorstep, and to mean that people don't have to repeat themselves constantly. You know, life is hard enough. If there were just some people who could have greater insight, and it would make all the difference, and therefore reduce anxiety, reduce that feeling of isolation when they're in a particular vulnerable situation, and just mean that actually we can reach those audiences that, you know, we try hard, but actually, you know, it's not straightforward life and what happens. So actually that little bit of extra information, and we have lots of you know, training, lots of information available. Yet again, very happy to share all of it, just to help understand, those actions that are different, that we could do in a different way to support people living with mental health issues, those situations whereby, just making certain that people don't feel like, that they are the problem. That's such a huge issue in society. Vulnerability is very, very personal, and even just slight changes in our communication and ensuring we're talking about vulnerability being the situation rather than it being the person makes a huge difference to people to actually listen and say, oh, okay, maybe I could benefit from this. And then the bigger picture kind of adds in a more consistent and joint approach to supporting those households.
Just picking up on that point, Joe, I think it's the point about communication with a person who is deaf, the communication with somebody who's got a disability, whether it's a visible or an invisible disability, and the point that Arnab made about whether if English is not your first language. And I think there is a whole host of lessons for government right across the board to learn many lessons as a result of this pandemic. And how messages are communicated.
Absolutely.
Accessibility of information, accessibility of policy.
Yeah.
It really is key to making sure that people are integrated and are not isolated, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. So, I think there's probably another sort of couple of examples just to sort of, keep in mind. One of the elements that your report has shown and clearly identified as an impact of COVID is that sadly scams are massively increased, and it's very much through my membership of the National Mental Capacity Forum leadership group. I run a separate utility work group. So back in November, we launched a program and a whole raft of support mechanisms for utility companies to help support their colleagues and customers to spot, stop and prevent scams. So the Utilities Against Scams that was launched is for large, small businesses, but there's really useful information in there to help our colleagues identify when, maybe by going into people's homes or even themselves, identifying when something could potentially be, a risk for those people who might be more susceptible because they're lonely, and therefore to get a phone call or some post is really important. So yet again, the Utilities Against Scams details, I can share those with you just for an approach which is a singular, it's based on practical actions. The idea of creating this as Cadent, myself being the chair of this group as well, it wasn't about stamping Cadent all over everything, although obviously things that we do with our customers, we do have our branding on, but the actual guidance that was published is very much about working with people like National Trading Standards and working across the whole industry for a consistent approach and making certain that there's a toolkit of created artwork and useful tools for colleagues and customers, from simple things like, it might sound daft, but a door sticker, which if it happens to be glass on the side that somebody's knocking, they sort of saying we're scam aware, and on the inside just maybe giving the sort of hints and tips of things to remember that, as a utility company, we will always have ID, and that, don't feel pressurized, those sorts of useful tips. And the idea of a sticker, so for me, when I started working with National Trading Standards, I thought, what difference is that going to make? And they said, you'll be surprised by the fact of that type of doorstep scam. It is an opportunist more scam. So if somebody sees a sticker, it will put off a high percentage of those people knocking on the door and saying, hi, I'm from the water board, I'm from the gas board, and doing distraction burglaries. So there's a whole host of materials again. So Peter and everybody, I'll probably be bombarding you, but it is just that open offer. We've been doing more of a sort of national approach for quite a while. So, and we found that to be really helpful in the training and the materials, which are just there. Please do use them, use and abuse, because we need to get them out to people to protect them.
Thank you. I think conversely, the other side of the thing that you've just been talking about there is digital skills. Digital awareness. We know that disadvantaged parts of our communities isolated parts of our communities do not have access to devices or share devices. We've seen with children in overcrowded homes that are sharing one device or don't have access to a device at all. Could each of you comment for me as to how your respective organisations can help the digital divide, and what, if anything, you're already doing on that? Thank you.
Arnab, did you want to go first? I've just been talking a lot. You probably fed up hearing my voice for a moment, so.
We're happy to, you know. So we know that 5.4 million adults in the UK have no access to computers or digital devices. It's a shocker when you hear that, because you just assume everyone has. Over 10 million people in this country are digitally illiterate. Couldn't even, you know, operate the internet. That's a shocker too, you'd think, in the 21st century. So there's a huge gap that we need to address, a huge challenge as a society, as a government, as a community, businesses, because we need our communities to be tech savvy. They need to, the digital platforms, as have been proven over this pandemic. You know, I'm far more savvy than I used to be 6 months ago, having spent more, you know, time on conferences, on WebEx, on Zoom and everything else than I've ever done in my whole life. But it's been an eye-opener, and it's changed the way that the FSB operates, the way we operate our businesses, my own businesses. So having those left behind communities onboarded as a social platform to communicate, to work, to educate, it's really, really important. And I think all of us have a responsibility now to address that great challenge for the future. And businesses can do that by getting involved with their communities, loaning their resources, helping, you know, because we all have computers. I mean, we know businesses who actually support libraries, give their old stock to them, invite people in to use their resources at the weekend, give digital training. And that's something we could all do, and it can be done incredibly cost effectively. And the measured output and impact of that nationally can be phenomenal. And it covers
Arnab, on that point, do your members, do you as an organisation have a scheme whereby redundant equipment is donated to a particular reuse, recomputer organisation?
No, actually, the FSB don't. I mean, this is something we picked up where people are acting independently on the ground and are doing this. But do you know what, Peter? You've given me a great idea.
Great.
Thank you.
Jill, would you like to add something?
Absolutely. So yeah, completely agree. So pleased to say that at Cadent we do, there's lots of things we do with helping to support different regional, you know, sort of parts of society through schools, etc., to help support where we can with old kit. We have a charitable foundation that helps support, etc. But I think one of the other things that we need to ensure we're considering with all of this is that, yes, there are those who are digitally excluded, but actually some people are quite happy with that. They don't want to be part of it. And I think that's yet again where Arnab and ourselves and so many others are in such a privileged position of going into people's houses and seeing life happen, that yes, so we've got that digital connection, but it's not about just giving a digital connection, it's helping you to feel the connection. So that human element, as we're actually going into properties anyway, you know, where can we help? We can help by using systems. So for instance, again, an absolute open offer for anybody to view, use, etc. Systems for our colleagues to use, known as a referral system. So you can on your GPS on your handheld, your you know, put in a postcode, whatever, see which schemes exist in that customer's postcode to be able to help support them when it comes to other services that are available through local authorities and charities, whether it's from garden maintenance through to library services, for example. So very much making that interaction count, but also in all of our communications, being aware that there is a large sector of our communities that either are not in a position to or are not wanting to engage in that way, and always making certain that we're challenging ourselves that everything we do on social media, etc., that's great, and we can encourage those that we're communicating with to also connect with their families, neighbours and friends. but making certain that we're always aware that is not the only answer. We do need to make certain that there are some of these sort of more traditional ways of communication and bringing people together. And, you know, there will be some that work really well, and others we might try that need to be adapted because of the audience. And yet again, things like the research I spoke about helps us identify what that needs to look like. And Anna absolutely nail on the head again. You know, it's about working with those trusted parties. So it's not about Cadent, it's not about an individual company, it's about us connecting to be able to get to that right audience and communicate in a way that they can trust, they're comfortable, and importantly will drive right positive outcomes for the customers.
I think that's one of the things that came out of our earlier report in terms of different means of communication. We certainly heard evidence in our earlier sessions prior to our last report where we were seeing much greater engagement with people on the telephone, which had perhaps not been used for a long time. I think Arnab, you mentioned that a lot of SMEs were taking orders over the telephone, which they wouldn't have done. You know, that switch to digital has kind of almost left behind a tranche of people that would have normally engaged and rung a local telephone number and rung a supply for something that's kind of diminished away, and it's great to see that coming back as a means of reaching people who don't want to engage digitally. I'd just like to, as we sort of draw to a conclusion, because I do appreciate your time, could you give me some outline of suggestions, ideas about how we make sure that as a society, through your respective organisations or in wider suggestions, how we embed this volunteering culture that is a positive engagement in our communities, that brings communities together? How do we embed that? How do we bottle the good stuff that's come out of COVID? And we don't, you know, go back to being how we were, and we forget about all of the good stuff that's happened. How do we make sure that that stuff is embedded not only in our organisations, but is embedded in society?
Arnab, did you want to go first, or would you prefer I did?
No, happy to go first, Joe. I mean, look, there are a number of I think a number of things that we do need to do, because the pandemic's exposed so many of the structural inequalities and weaknesses in our society, which we're going to have to address for a COVID-20 or other existential threat. I mean, there are lots of things that are happening at the moment, and that's made us aware that we've got to put these things right. And the engagement with our communities and bringing them closer together is going to be very important. I think the Social Value Act, as we're deploying it out in government, and it's an iterative process, we're starting something which should have a transformational impact. The other thing we found out, that a lot of the traditional institutions, from banks and including business organisations, do not have the reach and engagement they should have to all parts of our community. And that includes not just the ethnic minority communities, but some of the left behind communities, our coastal communities, our rural, agricultural communities. Frankly, we haven't done enough. So there's a scope of work for organisations and institutions across the board to address that challenge. And I think we have to do it all together, but government can be a huge enabler on this. So my ask for you, Peter, is to carry on pushing government to be the enabler and to give us the resources and the help that we need to really get out there and make that engagement count for the future.
Thank you, Anna. Sure.
Yeah. Similarly, from our perspective, you know, it's very much that I think that the period we've been through, we've, you know, as society, we've had to, you know, realise again that we're human, which is actually a really good step, and sort of, you know, take some things back to basics, allowing us to enable our colleagues to take time to do volunteering, use work vans, equipment, etc., is all, yes, very responsible and the right thing to do. But actually, we generally, you know, our people, not just our people, but the UK public, there has been a big stand to want to do more. I think that there's an opportunity to take all those fantastic case studies of individuals and groups who have done such great things, and maybe when individuals have struggled to get involved in more community approaches because there was just such an influx and they've done things on their own back, you know, no matter how small, it can make a really big difference. I think there's a huge opportunity as well around innovation. This is something that I've really taken a stand on. So within the COVID period in lockdown, identifying that people had actually themselves had an insight to what it's like to be socially isolated for a period has given them an awareness of what it's actually maybe like for that social isolation to turn into loneliness and chronic loneliness, and making sure we keep that understanding alive. So we did a call for innovation. Cadent partnered with RS Components and Nordic Semiconductor, which is actually a worldwide call to over 800,000 people on a innovation platform. And through that have had, we've selected 10 winners from across those entrants that came from across 15 different countries. And it's about, again, those practical things that can help keep people safe, warm and independent in their homes. It's about creating that connection, that human connection, but using tech in a way that is non-invasive and a way that people feel comfortable with it because it feels familiar. There are so many things that we can do, so many things that have started, but it's about keeping talking and making certain that we're sharing all those amazing case studies and stories that are there. And it's really difficult to do that because there's so much going on. But I think that we've just got to keep the energy going so that we don't lose that passion and we don't lose that encouragement to enable people to do more, because they really do want to. It's just them hearing that they can do.
I completely concur with Joe. I'd just like to add very quickly that there's a fantastic space that we've identified where you can bring the great and wonderful innovation that SMEs bring, to the mix. And when they partner with social and voluntary groups in those communities, and they bring out the most brilliant, innovative solutions to local problems. So one of the things that we really need to do is have a platform and a methodology of bringing SMEs, voluntary groups, and charities together to bring about those fantastic innovative solutions that Joe is talking about.
And just to say, through my connections, through the safeguarding work that I do, one of the things that we always do with the innovation is make certain that we bring in those experts and charities and associations. So this latest set of, Dragons Den, we've had Alzheimer's Society, MenCap, we work with RNIB, all of those fantastic charities that do a lot of work, but actually have the insights that we need to know that these new products and services are going to be the right thing for the end user. And actually things don't work in silos. It is actually, life is not as simple as there being one need. Life is life, and it's complex, and we need to be able to respond to that, but still make certain that it's in an approach that is not daunting for those who would benefit from that new product or service.
Are either of you talking to any of these pan-charity organisations? I know a number of groups did come together with charities, not necessarily merging, but collaborating. I've just been trying to search on my phone there for the name of one of them that I was aware of. Sunda's come online. Are you able to help me with the name of the organisation I'm thinking of there?
No, there have been several. No, I'm not sure which one you're thinking of, but yeah.
Right. I will send it across to you, Anna, and Joe when we finish. But there was a collaborative organisation of a number of national charities, and they were talking about how they harness and capitalise on the good stuff that came out of the pandemic. And from what you've just been saying, it sounds like collaboration with an organisation that's doing that similar sort of thing would harness what you're talking about. As Sunda's come in, and I think we're coming up to having been on for an hour and a half as we'd originally allocated. Sunda, and I know I certainly believe that we could carry on for a lot longer. Sunda, Jill, and Lucy, are there any questions that you would like to ask from the panel that are with us today?
It would be interesting just to hear a little bit about what one of the questions you asked, Peter, was about embedding. And I think today has reaffirmed that people and organisations stepped up in an extraordinary situation. Now that the issue of stamina and the issue of normalising that is the challenge ahead. I'm just wondering how you see the economic headwinds we're going into as a risk that this will get crowded out rather and seen as something we did early in the pandemic, or as an opportunity to sharpen this agenda. How do you think we can best respond to the economic recession context of taking this work forward?
Arnav, did you want to go first?
No, this time, Joe, you can go first.
Okay, fab. So ultimately, from our perspective, I think that from what the impacts are likely to be, what will happen is that, you know, due to the type of business that we are, because we're regulated, etc., from our own perspective, you know, we've got a job to do and keep that happening. But what it means is we're going into people's homes, and we already see poverty, and we will see a lot more as we go along. So connecting those people with the services and support within their areas, making certain that we've got that flexibility to support and, you know, raise issues as we see them, is really important. And just, you know, actually as industries providing access to essential services, just remembering that, you know, this is truly, this is something that a lot of people, you know, spoke before about vulnerability, it being a situation any of us, you know, can be vulnerable later today, tomorrow. So this is about keeping it human, making certain that we've got those tools and techniques to support our colleagues when they come across the situations, to respond in a respectful and relevant way and connect those households to the services that are there. So from a government, from a local authority perspective, it's about making certain that those services are known to us, you know, publicised appropriately, allow us to feed into, you know, what it is we see on a day-to-day basis, and just sort of help support a more consistent and approach, so that we're not duplicating effort, but we're connecting with schemes that can truly support the day-to-day situations that we find.
Thank you, Joe. Anna?
So a couple of things, I think, to Sunda's question. Yeah, I mean, there is an opportunity. I mean, I've noticed that doors are now open within government and local government. We've got more working together. I sit on a panel with the LGA, Local Government Association, working with central government on all these areas as well. I mean, in a way, a level of collaboration I haven't seen before. Strategic suppliers, small businesses, their supply chains, some of the new regulations that's been passed through, some of the PPNs that we've got organised through on prompt payment. There's a real dynamism within government and across the political spectrum, actually, to make sure that we're doing things that work and are making things more resilient. So your question, I think, is that there's opportunity done and a real hunger to make sure that we're doing all the right things at the moment, Sunda. In terms of networking and using the voluntary sectors and charities, Peter, definitely worth getting in touch with Claire Dove, who's the Crown Commissioner for the voluntary sector. She's been working very closely with us on the SME panel to see how we can do everything joined up. And the other thing that has begun to happen, Peter's probably noticed this, and definitely Sunda and Jill, is we're seeing a level of collaboration between government departments, which frankly, in years of me working with government and everything, I've never seen before, and that is fantastic. So the opportunities are there. We need to embed them, because we're talking about behavioural change, Sunda, all the way down the line, from how we procure, how we behave with the supply chains, how government departments behave with each other. And you're right, the challenge will be to maintain this momentum, because if we can do this, it will be fabulous for the country going forward.
Thank you. Sunda, do you want to ask anything further? Jill, is there anything that you would like to ask?
No, I'm absolutely fine, and it's kind of fantastic, inspiring stuff. Small Business, Big Heart is a very, very good report, but that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jill.
Lucy, is there anything that you want to ask?
No, I think that's fine. Thanks everyone for coming, really.
Thank you. I know we've got a visitor who was observing. I don't know if you would like to ask anything, Elizabeth?
Elizabeth is part of
part of one of my colleagues.
Yeah, so I'm supporting Joe, so I think it's all very exciting to hear what's going on. So we'll be supporting Joe to send out the further information following the session.
Well, thanks for letting her join us today and her contribution. So thank you both. Is there anything before I conclude that you would like to add? Equally, we're more than happy to receive further written information and evidence from you. And I know, Joe, you're going to send over some stuff. Arnab, equally, if you can continue to share with the APPG through the Secretariat any information that you think would be of benefit and use to us.
Will do.
But some closing words, some closing comments from you would be welcome. Joe, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So as much as I've offered to sort of send you details, it is just a general open offer, myself and colleagues. You know, this is such an important area that if there are, feel free, share my contact details. I've got no problem. You can give it to whoever you want. I don't even need to know. If it's going to mean that we can connect people together, support the communities that we live and work in, and help reduce isolation and loneliness, improve the situations, help people be more self-resilient as well, then please do. Always really keen now and in the future to look at approaches that capture all parties rather than it just being large companies, small companies, etc. This is about that holistic approach for the household. So really keen to do more, involve more, and put Cadent forward, and actually the industry that I'm representing here at the centre in helping to volunteer and do whatever it is we can to support.
Thank you, Joe. Arnab?
I think going forward, what we've started, the great work you guys have done, the literature that's been coming out across the board is really focusing how important it is that public, private and charity really need to be open, collaborative, and that's how we'll actually be able to face the challenges of the future. And so I'm very excited by a lot of the initiatives that have come out. I hope, as I said before, we gather the momentum and keep it going, because it will be transformational. And so I'm very happy to have been here, and I hope I said something useful.
Well, thank you both of you. You have contributed immeasurably. It's been a hugely informative session. It's been fascinating. I know we could have gone on for much longer. So thank you again. I do look forward to your continued engagement with the APPG. Thank you to the Secretariat of British Future for facilitating today and your continued support in all that we do. And I'm sure that you will look forward to the report once it's produced.